Hello, everybody. This is Stu Smith and Jeff Nichols with the Tactical Fitness Report. And today we're going to answer a really good question. I think it's something that Jeff and I both get quite often. And usually it doesn't necessarily come in the form of a question. We usually have to correct people along the way because they're either doing one or the other. But you can actually do both. And what I'm talking about here is training for the PST to get to the training and training for the actual selection program that you are shooting for, after your basic training or boot camp or anything. So specifically speaking, instead of being vague and spec ops, we'll say, what's the difference between training for the PST for buds and training for buds? So yep. Jeff and I have a lot of folks that, train with us, and we see, email us and we ask them, or they ask us about, hey, where should I start?
Yeah,
that's a classic question, and it's a good question because we're going to tell you what's their favorite answer.
Yeah, it depends.
It depends.
I almost wore that shirt today. It just was wrinkled as in laundry.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's and so the difficulty in delivering this answer probably in a short form for me is the fact that there are such small differences between the two. Like, the average person may look at, for the most part, look at how you might program the two differently. Like, hey, if you're only going to train for the PST, I'm only going to train, and you kind of overlay them and go, man, there are some real similarities here, but there's some glaring differences as well. So what we're going to try and focus on the conversation today is some of those differences, right? Because again, there's a lot like, well, wait a minute, that sounds a lot like that. Yes, they should favor one another because practical, useful human optimization, we'll call it that, through resistance training and aerobic training and all varieties will make you very athletic. It'll make you extremely capable to handle buds, but it'll also make you very, very performance oriented that allows you to, peak, as Stu and I say a lot, we peak for the PST. Right. You can do both. Yeah. It just takes a little bit of puppeteering, if you will, to do so.
Well, let's think about it this way. Let's think about the constants, the things that it does not depend. All right. So, and these are the standards, right? Yep. So you have a 500-yard swim, pull-up, push-up, sit-ups, mile and a half. Typically, they change optimal scores and minimum standards like I change gym shorts.
Yeah.
So here's
3 times a day usually.
Here's the deal. Here's the deal. If you can swim between 8 and 9 minutes on the mile and a half, or I'm sorry, on the 500, get 100 push-ups, 100 sit-ups, 20 pull-ups, get a 9-minute on the mile and a half. That's a good above average score that tells me you can ace the PST on any given day, right? Even a bad day, you can still make the passing scores and still be competitive. If you can get faster than that, that's great. But the one thing I tend to tell people is, why waste a lot of energy if you're swimming an 8:20 now? Why waste a lot of energy and go for a 7:30 when your run's a 9:30?
Yeah, because the big problem with that is if you're taking an individual and you're driving, you want to drop a minute, for example. I mean, but it's just a perfect example is when you start getting so finite to one particular aspect of testing, like swimming versus running, or if you, for some reason in your head, like I've had someone that wanted to get 60 pull-ups. Well, you're going to have to change your training so dramatically to focus on just that pull-up or just that swim that it will deplete the testing, number one, of other modalities. Like if you want to get 60 pull-ups, there's a real good chance you're not going to run an 8:30. Real good chance. Like the likelihood is just next to none because you're not going to have the body mechanics this massive back to and be able to run that. It's just going to be, now are there people out there that probably can do it, like Alex Vieta? Maybe.
Yeah, there are outliers,
But at the same time, then the question goes, well, you've mastered the PST so much. Now your ability to handle the volume of buds is certainly depleted probably. And that's where it's like all those pull-ups are going to impact. Like does it really matter if you can do 60 pull-ups and like Stu is saying, you run at 9:30 on a mile and a half? But the problem is you got to run that for 4, and you got to run that for 7, you got to run it for longer.
Yeah.
That's where that, I don't know if the term is that's where that standard deviation starts slipping off.
Right.
You are too strong.
Yeah. Well, I would say it's just one of those things like, hey, look, I love lifting weights. At one time in my life, that was my strength, and getting away from that strength was always really hard. I always wanted to just keep going back. I never wanted to lose my gains. Remember that one?
Yeah.
But I tell you what, if you want to get faster, you're going to have to lay off a little bit of some of the 1 rep max heavy lifting, right? And get faster and spend more time running. And that's the thing. You only have so much time per day that you can be training. If you're training to get 60 pull-ups, that's less training you're going to be doing in the pool. That's less training you're going to be doing on a track. So that's the constant. We got to look at those standards, and you got to be in the ballpark for those standards. And when you get that PST up to that level, you now have a solid base to train for buds specifically. So, for instance, now you got to start implementing swimming with fins. Swimming 1 mile, swimming 2 miles, and getting comfortable with swimming 2 miles every week. You should be swimming a 2-mile swim, to get your ankles used to it.
Yeah.
Because that's a hard transition, man. If you're not used to swimming with scuba fins, I remember guys who first ever put on a pair of scuba fins was at Buds, and they hated the swim, and they passed, but
the thing you guys don't realize too is, for someone that's a novice with fins, like you're going to see it happens every class. Every class has a pandemic of shin splints probably.
Yeah. Yep.
Well, a lot of that contribution is because they've never swam in fins. Like, well, Jeff, it doesn't matter. When you go into plantar flexion with that much stretch, like toe down, and then being pushed because the fin is hitting the water and you're kicking.
Oh yeah.
That's a big reason why a lot of people have shin splints. Has very little to do with running. You just overstretched.
Yep.
The tibialis anterior, the front of that shin, from all that finning.
And ankle mobility and foot pain. I mean, it also, it messes with the foot too. I mean, you are flexing that foot.
Yeah, because it tends to, if you can imagine your foot, when you're finning too, when you're pushing really hard with that fin, especially up, if you don't have good, strong, I guess would be erectors, anterior erectors of the foot. What ends up happening is the bone starts concaving. Your foot starts concaving, and your toes then can't splay out when you fin. So it's like binding a foot. Like if you take your foot and wrap it so it bends, right, concaves in, and then when you hit, the toes are supposed to spread out. Even when you fin, your toes should spread out. But if they can't spread out, all that force comes up through the middle of that foot. And then you get a lot of shin issues, a lot of feet issues. So just be aware that, I'm going to be in fins. But those fins are pretty confining, so you need to get used to them.
Yeah, okay? And it's really a lot of hip work as well. That's a lot of hip movement. And so anyway, so now you can start preparing to get through Buds, right, which is swimming with fins, running longer runs, you don't have to run quite as fast as you were in the 1.5 miles, but close to it. I mean, you probably want to be, 7-minute mile pace comfortably. So you can do a 28-minute 4-mile run comfortably. And on a bad day, you might drop it down to 28 or 29 minutes, depending on what phase, and you still have some buffer room in there before you come close to failing. So that's the goal there. You don't want to be striving for that minimum standard each week, because that just makes that 4-mile timed run even more stressful on you, on top of all the other stress that you have. So performance stresses can get you kicked out quicker than anything. I tell people all the time, don't worry about this 50-meter underwater swim. Nobody even fails that thing. For some reason, it's just, I think might have seen one person out of several classes actually fail it. It's something that you don't need to practice that much. You need to learn how to swim underwater, yes, but more people are going to get kicked out from running 4-mile timed runs than they will, the 50-meter underwater swim.
Right.
So it really has to do with allocating your time on your weaknesses.
Yes.
On those constants. You know what those constants are. They are the standards. Now, What are some things that are definitely you're going to feel as well? You're going to feel the weight of a log on your shoulder and over your head, and you're going to feel the boats on your head and carrying them, farmer walk carry. So those are very challenging events that if you don't have a strong core, strong musculature, posterior chain, whatever, however you want to call it,
Yep.
you need to be used to carrying some weight. So let's talk about a couple of our guys, right? And here's why it depends. Real quick, Jeff, you first with your folks, and we can kind of go back and forth with, why.
Yeah, I think the big thing is before, because the decision has to be made. Okay, depending when someone comes to see me or something or engages in conversation, I have to come to a decision. Is this person where they're currently at, their current state of readiness? Are they ready to? Have they been training for the PST, or they just been training? Have they been training for? Like, I got to look at it and go, all right. So far, this person is trained or untrained. What avenue? Because when you're talking about training for the PST, the problem if all you do is train for the PST, that's all you're really going to get initially.
That's all you're going to get good at.
That's all you're really going to get good at. Now, if all you ever do is train for volume acquisition, the people that train constant, the PST, they haven't trained for the speed that's necessary for the PST. So They have a hard time with that. So the question is, well, which one do you want this? Which one, Jeff, is easier to receive and train, right? Well, they're both kind of equally difficult. But my thing is if I were to favor one over the other, I would favor the person that's coming with a little bit too much volume. And the reason why is because there are a lot of times, let's hopefully we haven't gotten this person that's gotten too much volume with severe shin splints. Typically, we get the email that says, I'm hitting a plateau. I'm a little more tired than normal. Like I just don't quite have the oomph I used to. So having someone tell me that, I'm like, ooh, we got a person in the right place. We just need to throttle back some of their volume, refocus it into speed and velocity a little bit. And now we see this big jump in PST numbers.
Yep.
Also, we see this big improvement in health improves because we've gotten them out of overtraining. So now you see them both get better. Well, then I go, okay, what are we going to do? Typically what I'll do is I'll do it in phases. I'll focus, all right, for a couple of weeks, it becomes a conjugate. I'm going to have them focus very acutely on picking up their speed and power, and then reinforcing those new motor functions with volume. Add some volume. So you learn at a lower, it's like, I'm not going to swing my baseball at a game speed velocity all the time. So I'm going to work off a tee, work off some soft toss. But then I'm going to go do a game simulation and hit some live pitching. Well, after that live pitching, I got to come back and work some drill work. So look at it like that. Like, practice the skill, practice swimming fast. And then we got to, throttle back on some of that velocity, so to speak, and that volume or velocity. And then just let's add a little bit more volume so you can practice it at a higher average velocity than you normally do.
Yeah.
And if you do this enough, what ends up happening is when you go over to that volume acquisition after a couple of weeks, now you're doing what Stu is saying. You're like, man, I'm swimming 2 miles with fins, but it's progressive. It's going back between improving your motor function, improving volume with a better motor function. And when you add enough volume, motor function begins to dwindle after a week or two or a couple of weeks. And we've got to go back and reinforce motor function, add more volume.
Right.
Okay? And that's kind of, now I'm saying a couple of weeks here, a couple of weeks there. That going between these two scenarios for me works for almost anyone. I may just have to stay longer. Like Stu might bring up one of his cross country guys. He may need to stay in the hypertrophy phase much, much longer.
Yeah.
Right. Or that'd be on this side, I guess.
Right.
But you see what I mean? We're just basically bouncing between. There's more places we've got to go, but we're just using this running acquisition as an example.
No, it's a great one because, really, once again, it depends on your weaknesses. Yep. Like I have two guys that are from the cross country world. One's a guy is also a swimmer, so cross country and swimming, which he's killing it. I mean, just killing it. However, he's very light. He's probably about 130 pounds, right? Yep. So we have to and he's young, so
These are not strikes. These are not strikes
right.
against someone. They're just, this is someone's current state.
Right. This is a current state. So what would I recommend in this situation is, one, take some time. One, it's going to take some time to put on some weight. When this guy gets up to 165, 175, he is going to be an animal because he has this cardio base that's not going to go anywhere.
No.
You know, he'll still be able to run 6-minute miles easy.
Yeah.
You know, that's going to be a jog for him. And he's going to be able to run, you know, be able to swim sub 8, you know, because he's got perfect form, right? Yeah. So that's not an issue. Now we just got to start getting some strength. And his PT scores will probably rocket because he's so light, you know, in a matter of about a month to 6 weeks.
Right. Because
his
aerobic base is so good. His recovery rate in resistance is going to be so good. So that is why, again, I know Stu and I talked about this in a previous, is like, if we were to choose, we would choose somebody with a really good aerobic base that we have to build up, like a cross country, rather than because it takes a lot more time to get that 285-pound lineman ready for buds.
Yeah.
It's just because the mechanics of changing the physiology takes longer to adapt one way than it does the other usually. When the person is training hard.
Right. Now, I will say this. The young guy who's at 130 will probably be PST ready, I would think, probably in 2 months, right? It's not going to take him long to be in the PST zone to be able to say, all right, we got a good PST base. Now, hey, that's great, but getting 2 buds is a whole lot different than getting through buds.
Yep.
And so now let's focus on all the hard elements of buds. Let's start building a base. Let's put on some muscle mass, right? So we'll go through a hypertrophy phase, a strength phase, and, you know, pull back a lot on the running, right? I mean, just give him a break from running a little bit so he can actually, you know, use some of that metabolism, you know, or not use some of that metabolism so much to stay so lean. So we got to put on some muscle mass with it and a lot of eating. You know, in fact, I had a couple extra bags of protein that I brought to the gym today. I said, here's a protein bag for you, protein bag for you. Gave it to my 2 skinniest guys. They got free protein. So I said, start munching. You know, if you want to be big, you got to eat big. And we gotta start doing that. So that, you know, I would say this, you know, half of my reasoning for telling young people, you know, give yourself some time after high school before you join the Navy is primarily that reason. You know, we're all hard gainers at the time. I mean, I was the same way. I used to have to eat like a horse just to gain a couple of pounds. And, you know, as soon as I started running, I'd lose all that weight. You know, it was just, I couldn't keep it on. You know, just my metabolism was so high. Now I just look at food and I can gain weight. You know, it will change on you soon. But, you know, usually by the time you're 20, 21, you're starting to be able to put on some of that muscle mass and it stay on
for sure
a whole lot easier. So
yeah, because I think that the big thing for you guys that are younger and you're like, well, I just can't gain weight. Like the complexity of that answer is really not very complex. It's people really do have a perception a lot of times that they're eating more than they are, and sometimes it's more of a timing issue. They're just not timing it correctly. So they lose appetite and various other things. But, you know, as far as a person getting ready for buds, in this example, I think probably the most common things that Stu and I say, other than it depends, is it depends on timeline first. Because all of this is moot point if you're the guy that's saying, hey, as soon as I graduate from high school in 3 months, I'm going to buds and I don't care what you say. Like that right there, that's where the argument it ends right there. At that point, I've washed my hands and go, all right, well, that's on you. But the thing is whether or not you are aerobically deficient or anaerobically deficient or both, we'll call it that, for the PST and or buds, the one thing that you have that most people have in their benefit, but just we're so spun up that we forget it, is time. Right now, again, if we have that 28-year-old that really is trying to make a life change, options are limited. But if you are the 18 to 24-year-old selection candidate for whatever branch of service, there is no reason why you can't get physically ready for both if You're able to control a couple things in your environment. Don't go see the recruiter too soon. I'm not saying don't. Yes, you will want to see a recruiter, but if we can get you all, or you can get yourself to the best possible physical shape that for either one, for PST ready or for selection ready, if we can kind of get you that 80% mark and you go see your recruiter, you're going to have a lot more options. You'll be in a position to kind of go, all right, well, no, I want to do this. I want to do this instead, rather than just going and shrugging your shoulders and go, hey, I'm ready for the PST. And they're like, oh, this guy hasn't begun. Right. So do yourself a favor and take a look at where you're at in your training, where you're stagnant. If you're stagnant in your PST prep, this might be counterintuitive. It probably will be. If you're having a real hard time improving your PST numbers, probably the first thing that you might need to do is stop training for the PST. It sounds kind of crazy. You're like, well, I got to get it better. Well, it's like a racetrack, right? Sometimes you have more gas and sometimes you're in more brake, right? In a racetrack, but at the end of the day, you're still racing. Okay. Doesn't mean that you're not fast. Doesn't mean you're not efficient, but taking some, applying the brakes into the turn, getting the apex and accelerating out of the turn. I'm not just on the gas all the time.
Right.
So the PST is like the race.
Yeah.
Well, again, most NASCAR cars on a straightaway, if we had an indefinite straightaway, or they were in Germany at the Volkswagen Trust Center, where think of a 7-mile straightaway, right? Those NASCAR cars can get in excess of 300 miles an hour, but they're only going to average 210 on a track. You see, gas throttle. It's still a race. You have to treat the PST and prep like that. You got to do both, because when they're practicing, they're putting the miles in their car, but they're not doing it at 300 miles an hour.
Right.
They throttled back, right? But when they need to accelerate and pass, you bet your ass they're downshifting and they're just jamming the RPMs at 12,000. Yep. That's what the race is. That's the O course.
Yep. So absolutely. You know what we do? We actually do a PST cycle, with our group, where we will start ramping up our mileage, throughout the summer, ramping up our calisthenics, and then we'll peak and we'll start coming down. And when we start coming down, we take down the mileage and we start going really fast. We start really getting into shorter runs, faster times, half-mile intervals, mile repeats.
Yep.
Those really suck.
Yes, they do.
But they will make you fast. And then we'll break it down even lower and get to 200s and 300s, 100 meters. We do that old Manchester U workout. You ever do that one with you got to sprint 100 and then jog back, and you have to go on every minute?
Yep.
On the minute.
Yeah, they beep
oh,
it.
Man,
I know that.
You got to do 10 of those. That's so
Aussies
hard.
Aussies do that a lot in rugby. You see this common in rugby too, right?
That's a great way to build up
Killer.
speed. And so we'll get into that, and then by September, we will all take the PST, and it doesn't have to be September. I'm just making it because it just happens to be our PST month this month, and we just have the best numbers ever. And another thing we do is we treat the PST like a race, like Jeff was saying, which requires strategy, right? You have to take this thing so many times, and you don't want to do it every week, but throughout, the course of time, take it several times to where you actually know where your weaknesses are. You know where you need to put in a little extra gas. You know when you can pull back and save some energy. You know when you need to hydrate and drink some extra sugar just for, the extra, sugar use whenever you're going to go anaerobic on that last lap of the run. So don't think about the swim as a 500-yard swim. I think of it as 10 50s. And I look at all 50-yard paces of where I am. 50 yards, 50 seconds, 50 yards, 50 seconds. That's going to give me an 820 every time, right? And then we go into the push-ups, sit-ups, pull-ups. There's actually strategy for that too. You want to pace your sit-ups. Where people screw up on sit-ups is they start sprinting them out, and they can't match what they do in the next minute and a half than what they did in the first 30 seconds. Start off too fast. Slow down your pace. 20 to 25 and 30 seconds is going to get you between 80 and 100 every time. Nice steady pace. Same way for the run. Steady pace on the run. So there's some strategy that you can start learning when you take this test enough, and I'm not saying you got to take it every day. I'm not saying you have to take it every week. If you take it every other week, but over a course of significant amount of time, you're going to be able to create this strategy for yourself and see where you're falling off of your pace, and build your workouts around that. So when people ask me, hey, you got any training ideas for buds? What should I start doing? First answer is always depends. Second answer is what's your PST score, or question is what are your PST scores? And then my third question is what's your athletic history, and how many miles a week are you running right now?
Yep.
Right. That is a very basic minimal amount of information that can help me answer that question best.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the difficulty, folks, is that thinking you're going to go into the PST, or even quite frankly, a day at Buds without strategy is not a good idea. Yeah. I mean, even like I'm saying, it could just be this internal struggle. Like, well, I'm just going to get from meal to meal. That's strategy. Okay.
Yeah, it's really
strategy. It really is. So be thinking about that sort of stuff, because maybe this is a perfect, we do a video completely separate and we just call it PST strategies.
Yeah. Right? I love it.
We won't get into it deep, but I just think it's like, we got to understand that when you are training for something that has very specific numbers, right? So, because we can ask almost anybody, hey, what's your PST scores? And they give it to us. We go, okay, what's your splits on your mile and a half? And they basically give me the electronic question mark shrug. And I go, how many PSTs have you done? They're like 10 or 12. And I go, how long have you been training? A year. I'm like, how do you not have splits? Yeah. So like, you guys understand something. Just think about this. If you don't hear me say anything this whole podcast, understand this. We are recording people's times. That implies that there is a race. And with that race, if we want to improve that race, we got to know where there's diminishment. Yep. And if your diminishment isn't your end state. At some point in there, there's a clear poor split, potentially. Yeah. Right? For someone that's struggling to get past like a 10.5, so we'll call it that. Someone's at 10:30 or 9:45 and they can't get past plateau. They know, I've done 15 PSTs and here's my times, and what's wrong? Well, what's your splits? I don't know. So understand, put yourself in a shoe of a coach, a track coach. How does that track coach, again, we're picking on running, it could be swimming, could be push-ups. Yeah. At what point does your body goes, whoop, that's the limit of my ability to give you that much throttle. That's where you train to, folks, right there. That's your new training point.
Yep.
That's why we don't want you to train out to 20, 30, 40 miles a week if you can't do 4. Yeah. Now, once you do 7, then you do 10. Once you do 10, you do 12. Once you do 12, you do 16. Once you do 16, I'm not ever advocating more than that, unless they got to drop a ton of weight and we just got to cover some distance at a rucksack, a 30-pound rucksack for 2 or 3 hours a day. That's fine, but that's an outlier. We're not talking about. We're talking about the average person that's going to come in and go, okay, everything has numbers. Everything, because none of this stuff is arbitrary. No one's jumping up in the bar and the buds instructors are going, yeah, he's got really good form. He's about a 9.6. Get off the bar. Here's your score. No, we're looking for totals, folks.
Yeah.
So if you're looking for totals and you're looking for time and you're trying to break that time and beat that time and beat those numbers, you have to know your splits. You can have splits for a push-up too. You're going to be like, I'm going to try to maintain a position and posture throughout my push-up pace. I'm going to videotape it. Just videotape with your phone.
Yep.
And then stick it up next to a clock and go, you can see yourself, bop, bop, bop. And all of a sudden it gets slowed down. Man, I slowed down at 37 seconds. Now you have a new training point.
Yep. Love it.
Diminishing return is a loss of velocity, right? And motor function. What does that mean? Things get sloppier.
Yep.
So you train up, you improve that slop. So 37 is not the point of diminishing return. A week or two later, maybe it comes to 42. A week or few weeks later, now we get to 47. And that pushes that bigger number, that attrition number. Maybe you're at 60. Now you're at 74. Now you see there is a progression there. Now the more push-ups you get, getting better by 1s and 2s when you're in the 100 mark, you know, you're not going to be at 100 and go, I want to get to 185 and I'm going to train the same way I did to go from 85 to 115. Different.
Yeah.
That's when the term specificity becomes exactly that, very specific.
Yeah, and it goes back
to the PST. We don't need you to get 170 push-ups. If you can do 110, you're going to auto-qual if everything else is consistent.
Yeah. I mean, if you do, like I said, I always say 100, 120, you know, but if you can get above that, hey, that's great.
Great.
You know, especially just natural ability. You know, no need to spend extra time trying to go from 100 to 120 because really nobody cares. Right.
True. Very true. Very, very true. Yeah.
You know what I mean? You're just wasting your time getting that extra, you know, 20% of output.
So what do they call, like, we had the one guy that sounded, it's terrible. It's kind of mean, but we had one guy that did quit, and he's kind of been made fairly famous in my buds, not famous. It's a very famous photo of him in the buds class for me during pull-ups. And it's one, I remember when he quit. Good dude from what I remember, but I just remembered the buds. It was funny enough, that buds instructor messaged me yesterday on Facebook. Such a good dude. And he used to say, he's like, yep, there goes the world's fittest quitter. He used to say that all the time about when he'd see him. Cause you know, he, after the fact, he wasn't trying to be a dick necessarily, just the way he was, but after he quit, he was in, you know, PTR or in like rollback land for a long time. I just remember like a lot of those guys are in there cleaning up after us.
Yeah.
And anyways, long story short is that, you know, I think that we can't mistake that. Again, there's the common mistake, and we address it sometimes, is like, if you do focus, again, if you're a cross-country runner and you really think like, hey, my exceptional running is going to create enough buffer for me. So my strength is, you know, I'm not that strong. And same with me. It's like, I just knew, I trusted my gut, and I'm thankful before I came in. I just knew that I was like, you know what, I'm going to have to run. Like, just suck it up, man. That's all I did for a while. Like, it just did all, I mean, I was fortunate because I was at a university that I was essentially, I was staff. So I could go run. I could use all the athletic facilities. Like, I could use the stadium off hours. I could use, no one was chasing me off the golf course when I was running on the golf course because I was staff. Right. So I understand that, like, I'm just really thankful that I decided to pull my head out of my rear and go, you know what, you need to go run. Stop with the weight.
I knew what my weakness was too, and it was running. And actually I got it to pretty good little level that, you know, I never worried about failing.
Same.
The timed run. I never won a timed run.
And what was the biggest surprise, Stu? The biggest surprise is when you got your running up, that your physical strength didn't drop nearly as much as your run improved. Like, that was a big thing, folks. Like, I was certain that if I was able to run, you know, a 7-minute pace, mile pace at a time, that there was no way that I was going to be able to maintain the upper body strength that I had, that I thought was my advantage. Couldn't have been more wrong.
Yeah. I was able to maintain
really light and strong.
And another thing too, I probably didn't lift weights 6 months prior to buds. I was focused on, you know, basically turning a power lifter into a triathlete.
Yeah.
You know, and still working on the calisthenics. And then, you know, before, you know, 6 months of buds, and then after buds, I started lifting again. And I was probably 6 weeks into a lift cycle, and I was back to all the old 1-rep maxes that I had prior to, you know, before I was even, you know, preparing for buds training. So, you know, if you're a big guy and you're worried about losing all that, you're going to lose it because you have to. You know, it's a different game. You know, there's no bench press contest at buds, you know, so don't prepare for it. Right. You know, it's running and swimming and a lot of high rep calisthenics. And then the cool thing about, and I'm never going to say this is a fun event, being under a log or being under a boat, but, you know, for the stronger guys, it felt like you left the weight room when it was all over.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I felt like I had a weight room pump from doing that. Not that it didn't suck.
But in its own right, it was just more of one of those things that if you were going to get wet and sandy and punished, it was going to be as a class, not because you couldn't do anything.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was true. Like, I mean, honestly, the only times, probably like used to, the only times I ever had to go get wet and sandy during like a PT was like when the whole class did it or something.
Oh, yeah.
I never got to a point where, and there's a lot of guys. Here's the thing is like of everyone that graduates buds, 90% of those guys that graduate buds, 90%, if not higher, right, never had a problem with PTs. Like they weren't struggling during the PTs.
Or got gooned.
During the run.
Yep.
Or, you know, some of the swims can be a little bit difficult. I mean, that's more to the point of difficulty swimming straight. And that's early on. Like that's first phase. I would say the vast majority of people that fail, that can swim the swim, but do fail it, is they just weren't swimming straight.
Yeah.
So they hadn't learned. And then very quickly it's like, you know, sink or swim, no pun intended.
Right.
You got to learn how to swim straight. And when you do, you're like, well, that's crazy.
You drop 12 minutes off your time.
Crazy minutes.
You know,
like
real quick.
I did the OIC in my buds class. Who was awesome, dude. Not the best swimmer. And I remember one of the phases or two of the, like he was just like, my swim partner and I were the fastest swim partners. So we would both swim, not together, but we'd lead the people that need to do their swim remediation. It was just like 7 or 8 of us in the ocean, and we'd swim instead of the other people would be doing the run. So it was kind of nice. Actually, I got out a number of runs. I would swim instead just to get people to swim straight. And I remember doing the swim with our OAC, and he got a little extra retention because when we got out of the water, we improved his best swim time by 38 minutes.
Dude, just because you swam straight?
Just because he swam straight.
Wow.
And he goes, and the instructors were like, you got to be shitting me, sir. He's like, you just can't swim straight to save your life. He was a fast swimmer. He was a super fast swimmer. He just was short. OIC was short, and he was just like all over the place.
Oh,
so I would just turtle back. I just stay on my back and turtle back. And I would just say, stay within my bubbles. That way I'd turtle back so I could create bubbles. Yeah. And he would just swim in the bubbles. I go, just swim in the bubbles, man.
That's hilarious.
And we just swam straight.
Oh, that's funny.
So, anyways, that was again some of the stuff at buds that you look back on and go, well, I'm just glad. I'm glad that I prepared the way I did. And
yeah, I agree. So here's another deal. I know we talked a little bit about the endurance guy, and I don't want to hit this one too hard, but you know, another couple of guys that I have 2 different type of guys that are over 250. I have another guy that's 250 that was a heavyweight wrestler in college. And I have another guy that was a lineman in college. Now the lineman has since moved on, and he is in the program now, and he is probably about 205 now. You know, so he spent a good amount of time, at least a year.
I remember you talking about.
Yeah.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, it spent a year with us, and you know, during everybody's lift cycle, you know, he and I did a little bit extra non-impact cardio, you know, during that lift cycle. So instead of like a 5 sets of 5 workout that everybody else was doing, he did 1 or 2 sets of 10, and then all we did was just cardio the rest of the time, just to feel like a little pump.
We gotta get the calories.
Get the calories burning and just got him in better aerobic shape. And then by the time we started running again, he was just off.
Yeah, because now he's got this really good aerobic base, which he probably hasn't had for a long time.
Right.
He's already got a lot of good muscular strength.
Right.
You add those 2 guys together, then you kind of mature it in a program. All of a sudden, you're like, you got this big dude that can run and swim, and you're like,
yeah, it's awesome.
You're still like, I didn't think I'd ever get here.
Yeah, and it's nice to see. It's really cool to see that transition because I remember it myself. Yeah, I wasn't that big, but I remember that transition. And then, you know, with the wrestler, he's got an already huge aerobic base, you know, but he's a little heavy and he's hurting his legs to run.
Yeah.
So now we just like back off the run. If we run at all, it's short and fast and every other day with non-impact cardio, just to, you know, help him lose some weight because he's trying to get down to about what he wrestled. I think he wrestled at like 198, I think, when he was in college or something. Okay, so he's put on some weight since college. And now he's trying to drop it. He's not fat. He's just big. Big. And he probably was naturally like 225 and then dropped down to 198. So it was real easy for him to get back up to that level when he quit wrestling. So anyway, long story short, you know, with him, he has a whole different, you know, it depends is a lot different than the, you know, the cross country guys that we mentioned at the first part of this video. It's just a different journey. So whenever we say, it depends. We really mean, it really depends on your strengths and weaknesses and your athletic history, because that's going to drive what way you need to go, to really prepare for all of the non-changing standards, right? This is where you need to be, depending on where you are, your journey is going to be a little bit different to get there.
Yeah. Yeah. And keep in mind too, just as Stu is, and this is my last piece, is that, we're talking about these very different body types with different needs but we're all converging at the same point.
Yes.
We're all converging at the PST. We're all converging at buds or whatever. So don't think for a second that the 280-pound offensive lineman and the 130-pound cross country, if they start a program at the same point, the programs may look incredibly different to begin with. But at the end, a year later, they're probably going to be doing the same thing with similar volumes.
Yep.
Now, then the cross country guy is still going to be able to scoot.
Yes.
Right? Is that lineman ever going to be able to outrun that cross country? Very likely not. But that's the thing, is the distances and the volumes and the exercises and the way that Buds is set up. It's the true disadvantage at Buds would be if you're 5 foot tall, 100 pounds. That's a huge advantage just off of height and weight. Just the O-course might be next to impossible. He might not even be tall enough. But also someone that's 6'10", equally big. You see what I mean? So the bell curve of special forces, of like, those outliers are pretty extreme. That middle 80% actually has it's a big melting pot. That 80% is still a big melting pot.
Oh, sure. And you got probably, the range between, I'd say 160 pounds, maybe 160, 75 pounds to about 200 to 210, and the height and weights can kind of vary a little bit, but that's kind of like your 80%. And like I said, you got a few guys that are a little above it, a few guys are a little below it. But the one common denominator between a 130-pound cross-country player and a 270-pound former college lineman is both of them are trying to go from here to here.
The same little cozy 10% space.
Yeah, they're trying to get into, one guy's trying to get a little heavier, one guy's trying to get a little lighter, but they're all trying to hit that same performance zone, which is very doable. And that's what we're really trying to say, is that, just because you're a little guy, don't be scared. You can put on some mass if you give yourself some time. If you're a big guy, don't think, there's no way I'm going to lose 80 pounds and, be able to be a Navy SEAL or Army Special Forces. I've seen it dozens of times, people being able to do that. And they make some of the best Bud students.
So I know who you're talking about, who we both know, who's the academy with you, and they're like, thanks for giving the fat kid a chance, kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. That was awesome, so, they
give yourself, the common, like, probably, again, there are outliers. Mitch is a perfect example. The one thing probably, if I were to guess, just by percentage, the one thing that's most common for those that make it through are the time that they've allowed themselves to prepare for it based on what they need. Like, if individual X, like, you would never really know this until you do an assessment. It's like, that person's probably going to take a year. That person takes a year, bam, they're ready. If someone goes, that person's going to take a year and a half. They take a year and a half, bam, they're physically ready. If you go, that person's going to take a year, but they're dead set on going in 4 months, we'll see.
Hey, you know what? We should do one on what we think the common denominators are with those guys that graduate Buds at 18 years old. Because that is an outlier. You're talking about outliers.
Broken home?
What's that?
I say number one, I bet is a broken home.
Yeah, could be.
It
builds a resilience that
people that I know that went through at young age were either broken home or they were legacy kids.
Yeah, former frogs.
Yep. Yeah, their dads or uncles or whoever, or the brothers.
Or just hardcore. I remember this one.
Well, that's what I mean. That's why I'm saying it's like it's a legacy thing, because you just have a son that was, again, imagine growing up in a broken home, right? Again, pure imagination, because I did not.
I did not either.
Right, and I also, showing up at Bud's because I know people that came from a broken home. And I remember them saying, I get a warm bed and food every night, and I don't have my dad beating the shit out of me. This is pretty fucking easy. I've heard that before.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, it's like, yeah, it's this. It's like, yeah, I never had running water until I was 12. This is not very difficult.
Yeah. We had a guy that had never been to a doctor before.
The stuff that you guys are going to see, this population of people they're going to collect in Coronado.
I remember him saying, I've been to doctor and a dentist the first time in my life.
Yeah.
You know, when I joined the Navy, I was like,
yeah, I remember guys at boot camp, man. We had guys at boot camp that had most of their teeth removed.
Shit.
Because they had never seen a dentist before. And that's why they joined the military. Otherwise, they're in decent health. But they're like, I don't have anything.
Yeah.
You got just, and that's the very interesting thing. I guess that's kind of the icing on the cake here, folks, is that when Stu and I say, hey, man, we want you to get out in the world and get stressed out. This is why. Is because you're going to have people that were born with a silver spoon in their mouth. And I could almost say that I was one of those in the sense of nurturing. Did not come from money.
Right. So same.
All. Yeah. But my parents were always there for me. So I didn't have an excuse to quit. Now, on the flip side is you have someone that struggles, and like Dave Goggins is a perfect example. There is no surprise why Dave Goggins is capable of doing the things that he can do. He was trained to do it at a young age, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Right? He had a really, really, really unique, difficult upbringing, to say the least. Are we surprised that he is capable? We shouldn't be.
Yeah.
Right? But we also shouldn't be surprised why your average person who hasn't experienced what Dave has can't achieve the things that he does. Because Dave would say his entire life was basically preparing him for those next steps, because it was just, I'd rather die than live the way that I was being, live that I was living. So a different perspective, folks.
Yeah, I will say that. I would agree with that, that assessment of the types of people that make it through. But I will also say this. Some of them are just pure young Renaissance men.
Yes. Yep.
And freaking geniuses, good at everything. And I mean, we had this one kid in my Bud's class, an 18-year-old honor man. 2 years later, he showed up at the Naval Academy, went through the Naval Academy, had double major, played in a band, like rock and roll band, and played a sport,
That's not – are you talking about Pete?
No. Pete was a different guy.
He was later on.
He just retired.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he just retired. So
I gotcha.
Yeah, I mean,
I always like getting those stories from Pete or whoever going, I can't imagine, because I just like hearing the stories of Pete saying, hey, I had my trident at the Naval Academy, and like the way that he was treated in comparison to the young guys, men and women coming, he's just like, once he just like, I get it, I got the trident, give me a hard time, let's get past it. Once that happened, he was like, I probably had the easiest 4 years in the history of the Naval Academy, just because he goes, I didn't get the extra attention that most people get. Like, they kind of just let me alone.
Yeah, he had a good attitude about it, though.
He did, yeah. Pete had a real good
He knew how to play the game. He was good.
Yeah, I like it. I just talked to him. Anyways, reminiscing. But, folks, shoots, hopefully we're kind of onto something we know that we're picking up topics that potentially can be very difficult to have a focused conversation on a topic, because we might recover some of the things, but what you probably are starting to realize is that there's some real thinking to this.
Yes.
On your guys' parts as consumers too, and that's what we're hoping to teach you.
I will end this show like this. As scattered as we were with this conversation, that's how scattered the incoming questions come into us. Right. Yes. So this is a little bit of introduction to our brain as we get questions from the football player, the wrestler, the cross country guy, the 18-year-old, the 28-year-old, the 35-year-old.
We really are giving this some thought. That's
believe it or not. I know we're kind of bouncing everywhere.
I know.
There is a journey. There is a way to get through this. Is it just kind of depends, and you can kind of pick and choose and make some changes to some of the programming that we have out there, or that is out there for you. But you're going to have to personalize it for your weaknesses, because I will promise you this, your weakness will be exposed in the first week of Buds.
Yeah.
Whatever you didn't work on, you will find out real quick.
Yeah, I could say this with absolute experience. Now, I haven't done I haven't coached an entire season in the NFL or anything like that, but I have in college, and I started looking at this and going, this is incredibly complex, because if I'm preparing a football player, number one, what's their position? That tells me everything I need to know.
Yep.
That's it. Okay, if you're a wide receiver, here's your average velocity, distance covered. I got your body weight, right? What's the expectations? Got it, done. Now I'm just going to program. It's mindless.
Yeah.
In my opinion. Now, I'm not degrading the strength coach. Like,
oh no,
I'm not trying to say, hey, it's easy. I'm saying is it's much easier to program something when you have very clear dates and times, and then position demands.
And position demands, but also, I mean, you're not working in all the elements of fitness either.
No.
I mean, those guys don't have to worry about swimming. Those guys don't have to worry about, long distance running. I mean,
it changes some stuff, and then it makes specificity very specific. Whereas I guess that's the really cool side of what we get to do is we get to take this piece of clay that when it's all said and done and it's gone through that selection course, it may look nothing like what it did when it came in.
Yeah.
That's because we may have to make some big changes. Sometimes you have to make many. Don't know. Yeah. Everyone's different. So.
Yeah. All right, man. Well, that was a fun kind of
journey down to our brain. Yeah.
I think what we'll call this one like logical progressions. Because you're progressing one way or the other.
Something, man.
To get to here.
We're all on the same spot.
Yep. I like it. All right, Jeff. Appreciate it. We'll see you.